I remember the exact second I realized I wasn't looking at a cloud. It was April 3rd, 11:47 p.m., and I had been cross-referencing satellite imagery for almost 4 hours when my coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. Not because I was tired, but because Mount Shasta had simply erased itself from the planet. My name is Daniel Rourke, and for the last 7 years, I've worked as a remote sensing analyst for a small environmental monitoring firm in Redding, California. Most people think that means I play with Google Earth all day. The truth is more boring. I track snowpack levels, volcanic gas emissions, and timberline shifts across the Cascade Range. I've stared at Mount Shasta from space so many times I could draw every ridge, every shadow, every seasonal scar on its flanks with my eyes closed. That's why what happened on April 3rd didn't just confuse me. It broke something in my head that still hasn't healed. The morning of April 3rd started like any other Tuesday. I drove 45 minutes through low fog to our shared office space near the Sacramento River, said nothing to my coworker Linda, because she always wore headphones before noon, and booted up my primary workstation. The first image that came from Landsat 9, captured at 10:14 a.m. Pacific Time. I remember the timestamp because I wrote it down in my log before zooming in. Mount Shasta stood exactly where it should, 14,179 feet of dormant volcanic ice gleaming under spring sunlight. I marked the snow line, noted a small thermal anomaly near the summit crater that had been there for 3 weeks, and moved on to the next pass. But the second image, taken at 1:36 p.m. by a different satellite, made me pause. The peak looked darker than usual. Not shadow dark, not cloud dark. It looked like someone had taken a soft eraser to the upper 4,000 feet and smudged the pixels into a uniform charcoal gray. I told myself it was atmospheric interference, a passing storm system, maybe even a sensor glitch. I closed the image, reopened it, and the smudge remained. That was the first moment my pulse ticked up, though I didn't know why yet. I called Linda over. She leaned against my chair, chewing a protein bar, and said, "Looks like haze. Why are you sweating?" I wasn't sweating, but when she said it, I realized my palms were wet. I wiped them on my jeans and pulled up the 3:22 p.m. pass from Sentinel-2. The smudge had grown. It wasn't spreading outward like smoke or ash. It was climbing upward from the tree line, eating the mountain from the bottom up, as if the ground itself was swallowing the summit into a darker dimension. Linda stopped chewing. She stared for 8 full seconds, then walked back to her desk without a word. That silence scared me more than anything she could have said. By 5 p.m., I had pulled every available satellite pass from the last 72 hours. I arranged them in chronological order on my second monitor. The earliest image, from April 1st, showed Shasta pristine. April 2nd, morning pass, normal. April 2nd, evening pass, a faint discoloration on the south flank, near the old Hotlambolum Glacier route. April 3rd, 10:14 a.m., snow line normal, thermal anomaly still present. April 3rd, 1:36 p.m., the smudge. April 3rd, 3:22 p.m., the smudge had climbed 2,000 vertical feet. April 3rd, 6:01 p.m., the summit was gone. Not covered, not obscured. Gone. I need be precise here, because words fail when you try to describe something that violates every rule of physics you've ever trusted. In the 6:01 p.m. image, Mount Shasta ended at approximately 10,200 feet elevation. Above that line, there was nothing but a smooth, black, featureless void. No crater rim, no ice cliffs, no rock faces. Just an absence that looked less like an object and more like a hole in reality itself. The surrounding sky remained clear. The lower mountain remained in focus. I didn't tell Linda what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I did what any analyst would do. I checked every other mountain in the range. Mount McLaughlin, normal. Mount Jefferson, normal. Mount Hood, Mount Adams, Mount Rainier, all normal. Whatever was happening, it was happening only to Shasta. I pulled seismic data next. Nothing. No earthquakes. No harmonic tremors. No signs of volcanic activity. I pulled weather radar. Clear skies across the entire region. I pulled webcam feeds from 5 different summit-adjacent cameras maintained by the USGS. 4 of them showed nothing but static. The 5th, located at Bunny Flat Trailhead at 6,950 feet, showed a perfectly normal evening sky fading to dusk. Except the mountain behind the trees wasn't there anymore. That was when I called my supervisor, a man named Harold who had spent 30 years in volcanology and never once raised his voice. I told him I thought there was a major data corruption event affecting all Shasta imagery. He asked me to send him my files. I did. 20 minutes later, he called back and said something I will never forget. "Daniel, I'm looking at the mountain from my back porch right now. It's there. It's completely there. Are you feeling okay?" I drove to Harold's house. It took 41 minutes. I didn't listen to music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove through the dark with my hands locked on the wheel, repeating to myself that I was tired, that I was wrong, that the mountain was fine. Harold met me on his porch with binoculars around his neck. He pointed west toward the dark silhouette of Shasta rising against the stars. And there it was, the summit, the glaciers, everything. I saw it with my own eyes. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I almost drove home and went to bed. But I didn't go home, because when I pulled up the 8 p.m. satellite pass on my phone, the void had grown larger. It had descended another 1,000 feet. And inside that void, inside that perfect black absence, I saw something that made my blood stop moving. Pixels, not missing pixels, not corrupted data. Organized, repeating, geometric pixels arranged in a spiral pattern at the exact center of where the summit should have been. Something was inside the black. Something was looking back at the satellite. I showed Harold the phone. He put on his reading glasses. He stared for a long time. Then he said, "That's not possible. That's not how satellites work. You can't get organized noise like that from atmospheric interference." He looked up at the mountain, then back at the phone, then back at the mountain. His face changed. I had known Harold for 6 years. I had seen him at volcanic eruptions, at earthquake sites, at the scene of a helicopter crash that killed 3 of his colleagues. I had never seen his face do what it did next. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast I could watch it happening. His lips parted. His eyes lost focus. He handed me back the phone and walked inside without another word. I didn't follow him. I stood on his porch for another 10 minutes, watching the real mountain with my real eyes, try to reconcile what I was seeing with what the satellites were showing. The mountain looked solid. It looked permanent. It looked like it had been there for 500,000 years and would be there for 500,000 more. But the satellite data doesn't lie. Or rather, it only lies when reality itself stops cooperating. I drove back to the office. The building was empty. I locked the door behind me, something I never did, and sat back down at my workstation. I pulled up every satellite pass from every available sensor, optical, infrared, radar, even atmospheric methane detectors. The optical images showed the void. The infrared showed nothing. No heat signature from missing section. No cold signature, just null data. The radar was the strangest. Radar doesn't care about clouds or darkness. Radar bounces off solid surfaces and returns a signal. When I ran the radar pass over Shasta, the return signal came back as if the mountain ended at 10,200 feet. Above that, the radar waves didn't reflect. They didn't absorb. They simply disappeared into whatever that black space was. I started digging through older data, not from April, from March, from February, from last year. I built a timeline of every thermal anomaly, every seismic whisper, every weird reading that had been logged and dismissed, and I found a pattern. For the past 14 months, the thermal anomaly inside Shasta's summit crater had been slowly rotating, not pulsing, not expanding, rotating, at a rate of approximately 1 degree per week. I had seen that anomaly every day for a year and never noticed it moving, because the change was too gradual. But when I plotted the coordinates month by month, the spiral was undeniable. Something beneath the summit had been turning for over a year, like a key in a lock. I called Harold again at 2 a.m. He answered on the first ring. He told me he had been sitting in his dark living room, not sleeping, just staring at the wall. I told him about the rotation. He was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "There's something I never told you. In 1987, a geologist named Paul Wren took magnetometer readings on Shasta Summit. He found a circular anomaly beneath the crater. Not volcanic, not geological. He said it looked like a perfectly circular magnetic field, like something was generating it from inside the mountain. The USGS buried the report. I only saw it because I was a grad student and the file was misfiled in the print archives. I asked him if he still had the report. He said no. I asked him if he remembered any other details. Another long silence. Then, Wren wrote one sentence in the conclusion that everyone thought was a joke. He said, "The anomaly appears to be turning counterclockwise at a rate consistent with sidereal time." Do you know what sidereal time is, Daniel? I did. Sidereal time is time measured by the stars, by the rotation of the Earth relative to distant celestial objects, not by the sun. Something inside Mount Shasta had been rotating at the exact same speed as the stars since at least 1987, maybe longer, maybe forever. And on April 3rd, that rotation had finally reached whatever threshold it needed to reach. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the satellite feeds update in 15-minute intervals. At 3 a.m., the void reached 9,500 feet. At 4:30 a.m., it reached 8,800 feet. At 6 a.m., as the sun rose over Redding, the void stopped descending. It just stopped. The black spiral at the center flickered once, a single pulse of light that registered on every sensor simultaneously. And then the void began to rise, not retreat, rise. It was climbing back up the mountain, pushing toward the summit again. But something was different. The lower mountain looked wrong now. The forests around 7,000 feet were still there in the satellite images, but their color profile had shifted. The greens were too green. The browns were too brown. As if the mountain were becoming a hyper-real version of itself. A painting where every detail was too sharp, too bright, too perfectly arranged. I called Linda at 7:15 a.m. She answered sounding hungover. I told her to come to the office immediately. She asked why. I said, "Because I don't think Mount Shasta is a mountain anymore." She laughed. Then she heard my voice, really heard it, and stopped laughing. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I pulled up live webcams from the mountain itself. There are 7 public webcams on Shasta, maintained by the Forest Service and various weather stations. 5 were still showing static. The 6th, located at Helen Lake at 10,400 feet, was online but showed nothing but black. Not a black void like the satellite images. Just black, as if the camera was pointing into a room with the lights off. The 7th webcam was the one at Bunny Flat Trailhead, 6,950 feet. It showed the parking lot. It showed the trees. It showed the trailhead sign. And it showed a group of hikers, maybe 6 of them, standing at the edge of the parking lot and staring up at something I couldn't see. They weren't moving. All 6 of them stood completely still, their heads tilted back, their arms at their sides, like statues arranged by someone who had never seen human beings before. I zoomed in on the webcam feed, as far as it would go. One of the hikers was wearing a bright orange jacket. I could see their face. Their eyes were open. Their mouth was open, but there was no expression, no fear, no wonder, no confusion. Just a face that had been emptied of everything that makes a person a person. I watched for 3 minutes. None of them blinked. None of them breathed, at least not visibly. They just stood there, looking up at a mountain that was slowly being erased from existence, and they did nothing. Linda arrived at 7:32 a.m. I met her at the door. She was still in her sweatpants. I pulled her to my desk and showed her the webcam. She watched for 10 seconds, then grabbed my mouse and cycled through every other available camera. Static, black, static, black. The Bunny Flat camera was the only one still transmitting. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, that the hikers were still there, still frozen, still staring, and that none of the other cameras were showing anything because whatever was happening on Shasta had already swallowed them whole. Then the Bunny Flat feed went black too. Linda screamed first. A short, sharp sound she cut off with her own hand pressed over her mouth. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed into a tight, dry pipe as I watched the bunny flat feed die. Not fade to static, not lose signal, just stop. As if the camera had been turned off from inside the mountain. I refreshed the page. Nothing. I checked the server status for the Forest Service network. All 7 cameras showed as online. Their feeds were transmitting data, but the data was just black. Pure, absolute black with no noise, no compression artifacts, no sign of hardware failure. Someone or something was sending back a black image on purpose. Linda grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my sleeve hard enough to leave bruises I wouldn't notice until hours later. Daniel, we need to call someone. Not Harold, not the office. Someone real. FBI, USGS, the goddamn military. I wanted to agree with her. I wanted to pick up the phone and let someone with authority take over this nightmare. But I had already checked the USGS public feeds. I had already scanned the earthquake notification systems. I had already looked at every official source that should have been screaming about what was happening. There was nothing. No alerts. No warnings. No emergency broadcasts. It was as if the entire government apparatus had decided that Mount Shasta was fine, and I was the only person in the world who could see the truth. I pulled up social media next. Twitter, Reddit, local news forums. I searched for Mount Shasta and got back nothing unusual. A few tourists posting pictures from the past week. A weather update about spring conditions. A podcast ad about the mountain's mystical energy. Nothing about the peak disappearing. Nothing about frozen hikers. Nothing about the void. I searched for Shasta webcam down and found exactly one post from a user named Watcher87. Timestamp 6:45 a.m. Bunny flat cam went black. Anyone else seeing this? The post had 0 replies. 0 likes. 0 retweets. As if the algorithm itself was burying the only other person who had noticed. I sent him to Watcher87 a direct message. I see it too. What do you know? The message showed as delivered but not read. I waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes. Nothing. I tried calling the number listed for the Forest Service Ranger Station at Mount Shasta. The line rang 23 times before a recorded voice said the mailbox was full and disconnected. I tried the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office. A dispatcher answered on the second ring. I told her I was a remote sensing analyst and that I believed there was an ongoing emergency at Mount Shasta. She asked me to describe the emergency. I said, the top of the mountain is missing. She paused. Then she said, Sir, are you looking at the mountain right now? I said no. I was looking at satellite imagery. She said, Sir, I'm looking at the mountain from my window. It's there. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up. Linda was already on her own phone, calling her cousin who worked for Cal OES. I heard her say no. Listen to me. I'm not joking 3 times before she threw the phone onto my desk and buried her face in her hands. He said he'd check the state feeds and call back. He sounded like he thought I was having a breakdown. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. Daniel, are we having a breakdown? Together? At the same time. I didn't answer, because at that moment, my workstation emitted a soft chime I had never heard before. Not the standard notification sound. Not an error alert. A chime that rose in pitch, held for 3 seconds, and then faded into silence. A new window had opened on my primary monitor. It wasn't any software I recognized. No logo. No interface. Just a live satellite feed of Mount Shasta, updated in real time. With a resolution I had never seen outside of military-grade intelligence systems. I could see individual trees. I could see the frozen hikers still standing at Bunny Flat, their orange jacket now clearly visible, their bodies still motionless. And I could see the void. It had changed. The void was no longer black. It was a deep, shifting gray, like the surface of a mercury pool viewed from below. And it was no longer confined to the upper mountain. It had spread downward in a perfect circle, consuming everything above 8,000 feet. And within that circle I could see shapes. Not rocks, not ice. Shapes that moved. Shapes that turned. Shapes at angles which did not exist in natural geology. Angles sharper than 90 degrees. curves that reversed direction mid-arc, geometries that made my eyes water when I tried to follow them. "Linda, come look at this." She stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I felt her fingers tighten again. "What are those?" I shook my head. I didn't know. I zoomed in further. The shapes resolved into something worse. They were structures. Buildings, maybe, but not buildings made of stone or wood or metal. They were made of the same gray mercury substance as the void, and they rose from the mountainside in spires and domes and impossible arches that bent at angles that didn't exist. A city. A city was growing out of Mount Shasta, emerging from the void like a fossil being unearthed from ice. And at the center of the city, where the summit crater should have been, there was a tower. The tower was thin, needle-thin. It rose from the heart of the void and extended upward into the sky, past the altitude where the mountain's peak should have been, past the height of any human structure ever built. It kept going. It went up so high that the satellite image lost it in atmospheric distortion. I did a rough measurement using the scale bar on the feed. The tower was at least 12 miles tall. 12 miles. That's twice the cruising altitude of a commercial jet. And it was spinning, slowly, counterclockwise, exactly like the thermal anomaly had been spinning for 14 months. Linda let go of my shoulder and stepped back. I heard her breathing change. It became shallow, rapid, almost panting. "Daniel, turn it off." I didn't move. "Daniel, turn it off right now." I reached for the mouse to close the window, but there was no close button, no minimize button, no way to interact with the feed at all except to watch. I tried to force quit the application. Nothing. I tried to shut down the computer. The shutdown menu opened. I clicked shut down, and nothing happened. The feed kept playing. The tower kept spinning. The gray city kept spreading. Then the feed changed again. The camera angle shifted. I hadn't touched anything. No input from me. No command from the system. The view zoomed out, then panned down the mountain, then stopped at Bunny Flat Trailhead. The frozen hikers were still there, but now there were more of them. Dozens. They stood in rows, facing the mountain, their arms at their sides, their heads tilted back. Their mouths were still open. Their eyes were still open, and their skin had changed. It was the same gray as the void, the same shifting, liquid, wrong gray. They weren't hikers anymore. They were statues, or trophies, or something else entirely. Something that had once been human and was now part of whatever was waking up inside Shasta. I finally managed to kill the power to the workstation by pulling the plug from the wall. The monitors went dark. The office went silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights and Linda's breathing. We stood there in the sudden quiet, not looking at each other, not looking at the blank screens. I could feel my heart beating in my temples. I could taste metal in my mouth. I had bitten my tongue at some point and hadn't noticed. Linda spoke first. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We have to go there." I turned to look at her. "What?" "We have to go to the mountain. If we stay here, we're just watching. We're just waiting for whatever that is to come to us. I'd rather see it with my own eyes. I'd rather know." She was shaking. Her whole body was shaking, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't hysterical. She was terrified, and she was thinking, and she was right. Watching from a distance wasn't helping. The officials didn't believe us. The data was being buried or ignored or both. If we wanted answers, we had to go to Shasta ourselves. I didn't argue. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the external hard drive containing every satellite image I had downloaded since April 1st. Linda grabbed her jacket and her backpack. We left the office without locking the door. The drive to Mount Shasta from Redding is normally about 2.5 hours. I made it in an hour and 45 minutes. I drove at 90 miles per hour on Interstate 5, weaving between the few cars on the road, my hand steady on the wheel, even though my mind was screaming. Linda didn't tell me to slow down. She sat in the passenger seat with her phone in her lap, refreshing the satellite feed website every 30 seconds, even though she knew it would just show her the same impossible images. We passed through Weed, California at 9:15 a.m. The town was quiet. Too quiet. No cars on the main street. No pedestrians. No dogs barking. just empty buildings and parked cars, and a single American flag hanging limp on a motionless pole. I slowed down as we drove through, my eyes scanning for any sign of life. Nothing, not even birds. The air outside the car windows looked strange, not foggy, not smoky, just thick, as if the atmosphere itself had become slightly viscous, slightly resistant to light. Linda pointed ahead. There. I looked up. Mount Shasta filled the windshield. From this distance, 30 miles out, the mountain looked normal. Snow-covered peak, ridges and glaciers. Everything a postcard would show. But as I drove closer, the normalcy began to crack. The peak was too sharp, too perfectly defined. The snow was too white, the rock too gray, the sky behind the mountain too empty of clouds. It looked like a photograph of a mountain, not a mountain itself. And above the peak, where the sky should have been open and infinite, there was a faint shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt. But in the cold morning air, the tower, I couldn't see it directly, but I could see its effect on the atmosphere, a column of distorted light rising straight up into the stratosphere. We reached the turnoff for Bunny Flat Road at 9:47 a.m. The road was open. No barricades, no police, no signs, just a two-lane asphalt strip climbing through pine forest toward the trailhead. I took it slowly now, the car crawling upward as the trees thickened around us. The air through the vents smelled wrong, not like pine or soil or cold. It smelled like ozone and rust and something sweet underneath, something that reminded me of the formaldehyde smell in a biology lab. Linda rolled up her window. "Don't breathe it," she said. I already wasn't. The forest changed as we climbed. The trees became straighter. Their branches became more symmetrical. The spaces between them became perfectly equal, as if someone had measured and arranged every pine needle by hand. I pulled over at 8,200 feet, just before the road ended at the Bunny Flat parking lot. I could see the lot ahead, maybe 200 yards. It was full of cars, dozens of cars, hikers' cars, parked in neat rows. And standing between the cars, arranged in the same neat rows, were the people. I killed the engine. Linda and I sat in the sudden silence. Neither of us moved to open the doors. We just stared at the crowd of gray statues that had once been hikers, climbers, maybe rangers, maybe families with children. I saw a small figure in the third row, a child, no older than 7, standing just as still as the adults, just as gray, just as empty. The child's hand was reaching upward, frozen in the act of pointing at something I couldn't see. Then the child turned its head. It moved slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice. But it turned. Its gray face rotated on its gray neck until it was looking directly at our car, at me. Its mouth opened wider than a human mouth should open. And from that mouth, in a voice that came not from the child but from everywhere, from the trees, from the sky, from the ground beneath the car, a single word emerged. Witness. I don't remember opening the car door. One moment I was sitting in the driver's seat, my hands frozen on the steering wheel, and the next moment I was standing on the gravel outside, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. Linda was beside me. She had gotten out too. Neither of us had decided to do it. Our bodies had simply moved, as if the command came from somewhere outside our own minds. The child, the gray thing that wore a child shape, was still watching us. Its mouth remained open, that impossible dark oval that seemed to have no bottom, no throat, no end. The word it spoken hung in the air between us, visible now as a faint distortion, like heat shimmers over summer asphalt. Witness. Not a question, not a demand, a statement of fact, as if our presence here had been expected, as if we had been called. I tried to speak. My tongue felt thick, unfamiliar, as if I had forgotten how to form words. What are you? The sound that came out was barely a whisper, but the child heard it, its head tilted, not like a curious animal, like a camera adjusting its angle. The movement was too smooth, too precise, completely lacking the micro-twitches and adjustments that make human motion human. Then the child pointed. Its small gray arm rose slowly, its finger extending toward the mountain, toward the shimmering column of distorted air that rose on the hidden summit. I followed the finger with my eyes. The tower. I could almost see it now, not with my eyes, but with something deeper, a pressure at the back of my skull, a sense of something vast and vertical and spinning counterclockwise, spinning at the same speed as the stars. Linda grabbed my wrist. Her hand was cold. Not cold like skin exposed to mountain air. Cold like metal. I looked down at her fingers wrapped around my arm and saw that her skin had changed. Just a little. Just at the tips. Her fingernails had taken on a faint gray tint, the same mercury sheen I had seen on the hikers. I jerked my arm away. She looked at her own hand, her eyes widening, and for a terrible second I saw fear on her face. Real fear, human fear, the kind that comes when your own body becomes a stranger. Then the fear smoothed away, replaced by nothing, replaced by the same empty calm I had seen on every face in the parking lot. Linda? I stepped back from her. She looked at me. Her eyes were still her eyes, but something behind them had changed. Something had been switched off, or switched on. Daniel. Her voice was flat, not robotic, not emotionless, just flat, like a recording played at the wrong speed. You need to go up? They want you to go up. I shook my head. I stepped back again, my heel hitting the car door. Who want me to go up? Linda! Who are you talking about? She blinked. The blink was slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. When her eyes opened again, they were no longer brown. They were gray, the same gray as the void, the same gray as a child, the ones inside, the ones who were always inside. The mountain was never a mountain, Daniel. It was a door, and the door is open now. She turned, not walked, turned, her body rotating as a single unit, her arms still at her sides, her head still facing forward. She began to walk toward the parking lot, toward the rows of gray statues, toward the child who still stood pointing at the sky. I called her name. She didn't respond. I called louder. Nothing. I ran after her, grabbing her shoulder, spinning her around to face me. Her face was blank. Not angry, not sad, not scared. Blank, like a page that had been erased. She looked at me without recognition, without memory, without anything except that terrible gray emptiness behind her eyes. I let go. She turned again and walked into the crowd of statues. Within seconds, I couldn't tell which one was her. They all looked the same now, same gray skin, same empty faces, same frozen postures. The child had lowered its arm. It was looking at me again, its mouth still stretched into that perfect black circle. And then it spoke again. Not one word this time. Many words. But the words came out backward, not in reverse order. The sounds themselves were reversed, as if someone had recorded a sentence and played the tape backward. I caught fragments. Door open. Always here. You see because you were meant to see. The last fragment was clear. Perfectly clear. Spoken in a voice that was not the child's voice, but my own voice, recorded and played back to me from somewhere inside my own head. You've been watching us for years, Daniel. Every satellite pass, every thermal scan. Every time you looked at the mountain, we looked back. I ran. I didn't think about it. I didn't decide. I just turned and ran, back to the car, back into the driver's seat, my hand shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I got the engine started. I reversed down the road, tires spinning on gravel, and I didn't stop reversing until the parking lot was out of sight. Then I spun the car around and drove. Not toward Redding. Not toward home. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to put distance between myself and that mountain, those statues, that child with my voice coming out of its mouth. I drove for 20 minutes before I realized I was heading east, away from the interstate, away from towns, toward nothing but high desert and empty roads. I didn't care. I just needed to breathe air that didn't smell like a biology lab. I pulled over at a rest stop overlooking a dry lake bed. No one else was there. Just me, my car, and the wind. I got out and walked to the edge of the overlook, my legs unsteady, my chest tight. The mountain was still visible in my rear-view mirror from here, a distant white peak on the horizon. It looked normal. It looked fine. I almost believed it. Then my phone rang. The screen showed Linda's name. I stared at it for 5 rings, 6, 7. Then I answered. Linda? Silence. Then breathing. Not Linda's breathing. Too slow, too measured. Each inhale lasted exactly 3 seconds. Each exhale lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted. Who is this? The breathing continued. This is Daniel. Who is this? A click, then a voice. Not Linda's voice. A voice I recognized but couldn't place. A voice from somewhere deep in my memory. Somewhere I'd tried to forget. Daniel, it's Paul Wren. The geologist. The one from 1987. The one who had written the report about the rotating anomaly. The one Harold had mentioned. You're dead, I said. The voice laughed. It was a human laugh, warm and sad and tired. Not dead, just not here anymore. Not in the way you mean. I leaned against the hood of my car, my legs giving out. Where are you? A pause. Then I'm inside. I've been inside since 1987, when I took those readings on the summit. I didn't just measure the anomaly. I touched it, and it touched me back. It pulled me in, not physically. Something else. Something I still don't have words for. I wanted to hang up. I should have hung up. But I couldn't, because Paul Wren, or whatever was using his voice, was the only person in the world who might understand what was happening. What is the mountain? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. The mountain is a filter. It's been here for longer than humans have been human. It sits between our reality and something else. Something that existed before the earth cooled, before the sun ignited, before time had a direction. The anomaly I measured in 1987 wasn't a thing. It was a crack, a tiny crack in the filter, and it's been growing for 36 years. On April 3rd, the filter failed completely. I closed my eyes. The wind had stopped. The air was completely still now, heavy and warm despite the altitude. What comes through the filter? I whispered. Paul's voice dropped. He sounded scared now, truly scared. Everything. Not invasion, not conquest, something worse. They're not coming to take anything from us. They're coming to remind us that we were never real in the first place. Our reality is just a dream they're waking up from. And when they wake up fully, we don't disappear. We just become what we always were, characters in a story that was never about us. The phone beeped. Low battery. I didn't have a charger. I had driven away from everything, including common sense. Paul, how do I stop it? The voice on the other end was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, you don't. You can't. But you can choose. The people you saw in the parking lot, they chose, not with their minds, with something deeper. They accepted. They let go. That's why they're still there, still present, still part of the mountain. They didn't fight. They became witnesses. I thought of Linda's blank face, her gray eyes, her flat voice. That's not a choice, I said. That's death. Paul laughed again, but there was no warmth in it this time. Death is a human concept, Daniel. The ones inside don't recognize it. To them, you're not alive or dead. You're just a pattern that can be rewritten. The phone beeped again. Battery at 5%. Paul, what happens if I don't choose? What happens if I just drive away and never look back? A long silence. Then the filter doesn't just fail. It inverts. Everything within 200 miles of the mountain becomes part of the new reality, including you, whether you accept it or not. The only difference is that acceptance hurts less. I've seen both, Daniel. I've watched people fight. It's not worth it. The phone died. The screen went black. I sat in the silence, the dead phone in my hand, the windless air pressing against my skin like a weight. The mountain had changed again. I could see it from here, 40 miles away, and it was no longer a mountain. The peak was gone. The void was back, but it wasn't black anymore. It was gray, the same gray as the statues, the same gray as Linda's eyes. And the tower, the impossible 12-mile tower, was visible now, not shimmering, not hidden, solid, real, spinning slowly against a sky that had turned the color of a healing bruise. I got back in the car. I didn't drive away. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on my knees, and I thought about what Paul had said. Acceptance hurts less. Linda had accepted. The child had accepted. The hundreds of people, in that parking lot, had accepted. They were still there, still present, still themselves. In some way I couldn't understand, but I wasn't ready to accept. I wasn't ready to let go of the world I knew, even if that world had only ever been a dream. I started the engine. I turned the car around, and I drove back toward the mountain. The road back to Bunny Flat was empty. Not empty of cars, empty of everything. The trees had stopped looking like trees. Their bark was too smooth, their branches too symmetrical, their needles arranged in perfect geometric spirals that turned as I drove past, following the car like sunflower heads following the sun. I didn't look at them for long. I kept my eyes on the road, on the gray glow growing brighter ahead, on the tower that now rose so high I couldn't see its top even when I craned my neck against the windshield. The sky had changed completely. It wasn't sky anymore. It was a dome of rippling gray membrane, like the surface of a soap bubble stretched across the entire horizon, and the tower pierced through it like a needle through fabric. Beyond the membrane, I could see something moving. Shapes. Large shapes. Shapes that had no fixed size or shape, that grew and shrank and twisted as I watched, their outlines bleeding into each other like watercolors on wet paper. I passed the turnoff for weed. The town was still there, still empty, but something had changed. The buildings had softened. Their edges weren't sharp anymore. They looked like they were melting, their walls drooping downward, their roofs sagging, their windows stretching into long vertical slits that reminded me of eyes. Closed eyes. Watching eyes. I didn't slow down. I pressed the accelerator and left weed behind. The melting buildings shrinking in my rear-view mirror until they looked like a row of gray teeth in a receding gum line. My phone was dead. I had no map, no GPS, no way to call for help even if help existed anymore. But I need directions. The mountain pulled me like a tide, the gray light growing brighter with every mile, the tower growing taller, the shapes beyond the membrane growing clearer. They weren't just shapes. They were beings. I could see that now. Beings the size of mountains, moving through a space that wasn't space, their bodies made of the same shifting gray mercury as the void, their limbs, if they had limbs, bending at angles that didn't exist in any geometry I knew. One of them turned toward me, toward the mountain, toward the tiny car speeding down an empty highway, toward a door that had already opened. I reached the Bunny Flat Road at 11:23 a.m. I know the time because the car's clock was still working, even though everything else seemed to be failing. The clock was wrong, though. It was ticking backward. I watched the numbers decrease. 11:22, 11:21, 11:20. Even as I drove forward, even as the gray light intensified, even as the air grew thick and sweet and heavy, time was breaking down here. Or maybe time was the first thing the filter had been holding back. And without the filter, time was reverting to whatever it was before humans invented seconds and minutes and hours. The parking lot came into view. The statues were still there, hundreds of them, standing in their neat rows, their gray faces turned toward the tower, their gray arms at their sides, their gray mouths open in those perfect black ovals. But they weren't alone anymore. New figures stood among them, figures that hadn't been there before. Figures that look almost human, but not quite. Their proportions wrong, their limbs too long, their heads too large, their faces smooth and featureless like mannequins waiting for features to be painted on. They moved, slowly, deliberately, walking between the statues, touching them gently on the shoulders, on the cheeks, on the closed eyelids. And wherever they touched, the statues changed. Their gray skin grew darker. Their open mouths grew wider. Their empty eyes grew deeper. I stopped the car at the edge of the lot. I didn't get out. I just watched, my hands frozen on the wheel, my breath fogging inside of the windshield even though the air in the car was warm. One of the faceless figures turned toward me. It had no eyes, but I felt it looking, felt it seeing me, seeing through me, seeing the shape of my thoughts, the pattern of my memories, the structure of everything I had ever been. It raised one long gray arm and pointed at the mountain, at the tower, at the void where the summit used to be. Then it spoke, not with a mouth. It had no mouth. The voice came from everywhere, from the air, from the ground, from inside my own chest. "You are late." The voice was flat, not angry, not impatient, just stating a fact. The door has been open for 1 hour and 47 minutes. The transition is almost complete. You must decide now. Decide. Paul had said the same thing. Choose. Accept. Let go. I looked at the statues. I looked at the faceless figures. I looked at the tower spinning against the torn sky. And I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Not fear, not confusion, not desperation. I felt anger. Hot and bright, and completely human. I didn't ask for any of this, I said. The words came out louder than I intended. I didn't ask to see. I didn't ask to witness. I was just doing my job. I was just watching satellites. You're the ones who showed me. You're the ones who opened the door where I could see it. You did this to me. The faceless figure didn't respond. It just stood there, waiting. The other figures had stopped moving. The statues had stopped changing. Everything was frozen, waiting, watching. Even the tower seemed to slow its spin. The only thing moving was a clock on my dashboard, ticking backward. 10:54, 10:53, 10:52, time unwinding like a spool of thread. I got out of the car. I don't know why. Anger, maybe, or curiosity, or something else. Something the mountain was doing to my mind, softening my resistance, making acceptance feel less like surrender and more like relief. I walked toward the faceless figure. My legs felt heavy, my feet sinking slightly into gravel, as the ground had become soft, pliable, moldable. The figure didn't move as I approached. It just stood there, 7 feet tall, featureless, gray, waiting. You want me to choose? I said. Fine. I choose to know. I choose to understand. I don't want to accept. I don't want to let go. I want to know what you are and why you're here, and what happens to my world when you're done with it. The figure tilted its head. The gesture was almost human, almost gentle, and that made it more terrifying than anything else. Then it spoke again, and this time a voice came not from everywhere, but from inside my own head, a voice that sounded like my own thoughts, but wasn't, a voice that knew things I had never known. We are not invaders. We are not conquerors. We are the original authors. Your reality was a story we wrote a very long time ago, a story we told ourselves to pass the time. But stories grow stale. Characters become predictable. Plot lines repeat. So we stop telling the story. We close the book. For 1 billion years, we forgot about this little world, this little mountain, this little dream. But something kept the story alive. Something kept the pages turning even after we stopped writing. Your kind, your scientists, your satellites, your endless, obsessive watching. Every time you looked at the mountain, you were reading the story, and reading kept the story alive. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. We didn't know. We were just monitoring, just doing our jobs. The figure made a sound, not a laugh. Something softer, sadder. That's what characters always say. I was just following orders. I was just doing my job. I didn't know my actions had meaning. But every action has meaning, Daniel. Every satellite pass was a sentence. Every thermal scan was a paragraph. You weren't monitoring the mountain. You were narrating it, and your narration woke us up. I thought of all those years, all those hours, all those images I'd stared at, analyzed, cataloged. I thought of the thermal anomaly I had noted every single day, the one that had been rotating counterclockwise at the speed of the stars. I thought of the report Harold had mentioned, the one from 1987, the one where Paul Wren had written that strange sentence about sidereal time. We had been watching for decades. We had been reading the story out loud, without even knowing it, and our voices had reached the authors. Why me? I asked, why did I see it first? Why did the satellites show me the void when everyone else saw a normal mountain? The figure reached out. Its long gray fingers touched my chest, right over my heart. The touch was cold, but not painful. Cold like the space between stars. Because you were the one who read the clearest. You didn't just look at the images. You loved them. You memorized every ridge, every shadow, every scar. You knew the mountain better than you knew your own face. When the filter began to fail, you were the first to notice because you were the only one truly paying attention. The others saw what they expected to see. You saw what was really there. I looked down. My chest was changing. Where the figure's fingers touched me, my skin was turning gray. The same gray as the statues. The same gray as Linda's eyes. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. They were rooted to the gravel. Sinking deeper, the ground soft and warm around my ankles. What are you doing to me? My voice was higher now. Panicked, the anger gone, replaced by the cold realization that I had walked right into the thing I had been running from. You are choosing to know, the figure said. Knowing requires proximity. Proximity requires transformation. You cannot understand us while remaining entirely yourself. You must become a little bit of us, just enough to see, just enough to comprehend. Then you can make your final choice. The gray spread up my neck, across my jaw, over my cheeks. I felt it reach in my eyes, and the world changed. The colors shifted. The gray light became everything, everywhere, the only color that mattered. The statues glowed with an inner warmth I hadn't seen before. Not warmth like heat, warmth like life. They weren't dead. They weren't empty. They were full of something vast and ancient and patient. The faceless figures weren't monsters. They were librarians, curators, caretakers of a story that had been told for so long that the tellers had forgotten they were telling it. And the tower, I could see the tower now, really see it. It wasn't a structure. It was a spine, the spine of the story, the central axis around which every sentence, every paragraph, every chapter had turned. And at the base of the spine, buried deep in the mountain, buried deep in the earth, buried deep in the bedrock of reality itself, there was a book the size of a continent, a book with pages that turn on their own, writing and rewriting themselves with every thought, every action, every satellite image every human had ever captured. The book was open to a page near the end. And on that page, written in letters of fire and ice and gray light, was the final sentence of the story, the sentence that would end everything and begin something else. I tried to read it. The words shifted as I looked at them, refusing to hold still, refusing to be understood. But I caught fragments, and the watcher became the witness, and the mountain remembered what it had always been, and the door closed behind them, not because they were leaving, but because they had never truly arrived. The faceless figure spoke again, but its voice was different now, softer, almost kind. You see now, the story was never about the mountain. The story was about the watching. The mountain was just the place where the watching happened. You were not a character in this story, Daniel. You were the narrator, and now the narrator must decide how the story ends. I looked at the book, at the final sentence, at the words that wouldn't hold still. I can change it? I asked. I can write the ending? Not write. Choose. The story has many possible endings. They all exist simultaneously, like branches on a tree. Your choice will determine which branch becomes real. For you, for the mountain, for everyone who ever looked up at the sky and wondered what was watching back. I thought of Linda, her flat voice, her gray eyes, her blank face. She had chosen acceptance. She had let go. Was she happy? Was she at peace? I couldn't tell. The gray warmth in the statue suggested peace, but it was a peace I couldn't understand, a peace that came from surrendering everything that made me human. I thought of Paul Wren, trapped inside since 1987, still conscious, still aware, still talking to me on a phone that should have been dead. He had chosen knowledge without acceptance. He understood what was happening, but he hadn't let go. Was that better? Was it worse? He had sounded tired. So tired. I thought of all those years at my workstation, the coffee cups, the late nights, the thermal anomalies, the way I had loved that mountain, loved its permanence, its solidity, its refusal to change. But it had been changing all along, rotating, turning, waiting. And I had been watching, not because I was doing my job, but because something in me had always known. Something in me had always been ready to witness. I stepped forward. The ground released my feet. The gray retreated from my face, just a little, just enough for me to feel like myself again. I walked toward the book, toward the final sentence, toward the words that would decide everything. The faceless figures parted to let me pass. The statues turned their heads to watch me go. Even the vast shapes beyond the torn membrane paused their movement, waiting, watching, witnessing. I reached the edge of the page. The letters were close enough to touch now. They were still moving, still shifting, but I could read them, not with my eyes, with something deeper. The final sentence of the story was this. And then the watcher closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the mountain was a mountain again, and the sky was a sky, and the only thing that had changed was him. I understood. The ending wasn't about saving the world or destroying it. It wasn't about fighting or surrendering. It was about seeing, about understanding that the story had always been mine to tell, even when I didn't know I was telling it. The mountain would return to normal. The void would close. The tower would vanish. But I would never be the same. I would carry the gray inside me forever, a small piece of the original authors, a small piece of the story that had written itself through my eyes. I touched the words. The world went white, then gray, then black. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting in my car. The parking lot was empty. No statues. No faceless figures. No tower. The mountain rose against a normal blue sky, snow-capped and solid and real. My phone was in my hand, fully charged, showing a satellite image from April 4th, 8 a.m. Mount Shasta looked exactly as it should. I drove home. I went back to work. I never told anyone what happened. Not really. Linda was at her desk the next day, wearing headphones, eating a protein bar. She didn't remember anything. None of them did. The hikers on the webcam had all gone home, their memories wiped clean, their skin pink and human and alive. But I remember, and sometimes late at night, when I pull up the satellite feeds and stare at Mount Shasta, I see it flicker, just for a second, just at the summit. The peak disappears. The void opens. The tower rises. And the gray shapes beyond the membrane turn to look at me, one patient eye at a time, waiting for me to start reading the story again. The mountain never forgot me, and I will never stop watching.